So I want to start off today with my January 1st, 2020 New Year's resolution. So we can actually look at what I had set forth for my New Year's resolutions at the very beginning of the year at 8 a.m. 4K, 5K, 1080p with anti-aliasing, 720p at a rock-solid 60 frames per second, or 60 hertz. 640 by 480 via software rendering. 8K resolution for the new year. And finally, adaptive resolution, which I actually selected. I have a little pointer pointing to adaptive resolution. So, in general, knowing what we know now about 2020 and how it's gone, you see so many people talking about how they lost their job, or maybe they contracted the virus. Perhaps they're just viewing the news, seeing all the doom and despair, the chaos that's happening in certain parts of the world, certain parts of the country, in the case of the United States of America. But people are having all kinds of reactions. There seems to be another crazy story every day. There was the murder hornets. There's a lot of things that keep on popping up just for a day or two. But then you have things like COVID-19 that just isn't going away very fast. The president has said that it's disappearing, and I actually agree with that term. It is disappearing, but the problem with it is that it's not disappearing at any rate of speed. So when you say it's disappearing, while you might be technically true it's going to go away at some point, you do need to understand that there's a timetable for that, and we don't really have it. But in the case of this New Year resolution tweet, yes, I'm going through monitor or television resolutions. And the point being, so we have 4K, 5K. People that play video games or do a lot of CAD work or other things like that may be familiar with some of these terms. And of course, if you've ever seen the display tab, the properties in Windows or Linux or anything else, you'll know about this, Mac OS. And I think there's some throwbacks here because you have 640 by 480. I don't think any games today use 640 by 480, except for maybe sometimes on the Nintendo Switch and other portable systems. So I think our younger viewers might not understand what 640 by 480 is, but that was kind of the standard back in the 90s. One of the key, even lower than that really, 320 by 240. And then, of course, 8K. But adaptive is different because we didn't really have adaptive back in the 90s, the 2000s. Adaptive resolution. Well, what does that mean? Check out Digital Foundry for more information on the details, but I'm going to go over just a brief overview and we can talk about it. So adaptive technology is essentially a program, a back-end, part of a software, hardware, any kind of rendering engine, depending on how much is hardware, how much is software, any sort of rendering that takes into account a frame rate target. Okay, this isn't very philosophy, politics, maybe a little satire, but this is kind of what we do on this channel. We kind of jump from all these different topics that interest me, and hopefully some of them interest you too, and I hope you enjoy my ruminations. But adaptive resolution essentially says, okay, so if we want to render at a higher resolution like 4K, the performance is going to be terrible. The game is going to look like a slideshow. We're not going to be able to play it. The responsiveness of the controls will not be there. So what we're going to do is we can always take the resolution all the way down to 1080p, hell, 640 by 480, whatever it might be, that will allow the game to run and perform at the correct level, a level that's acceptable to the consumer. We could do that, but adaptive gets the best of both worlds because when it sees a high rendering load, which means lower frame rates, it lowers the resolution. So it adapts to the situation depending on what's on screen, what's being rendered at that time, either in hardware or in software. So this is a solution that has really revolutionized, in a way, the way that we do portable gaming, especially because the Switch, almost every single game on Nintendo Switch is a totally adaptive resolution. Very seldom do you see a game that's actually locked. They usually go, okay, well, we'll have it up high when there's not much on screen, and we'll turn it down when the action heats up. And the interesting part is, okay, we've talked about gaming for about 5 minutes, and hardware and software, but we haven't talked about the actual New Year's resolution. And I think when we see what's happening in the world today, how many variables, how many factors are bouncing around, it's important to be adaptive and to be ready for any change that may come. We learned that back in March and April as the lockdowns continued and people lost their jobs. People were asked to do things outside of their comfort zone. Some people didn't want to wear the mask. Some people didn't want to social distance. They said, why can't we party? Why can't we have a good time? And the fact is, sometimes for a little while, you have to set aside your freedom and do it for the greater good. But that is a very important question. How much freedom are we willing to give up for security and safety? And I think that, and some people have drifted very far into the, we prefer the lockdown, we prefer safety. And I say, hey, you can stay inside all you want. I'm not sure if it helps. There's been conflicting figures about herd immunity. But I'm not a subject matter expert on COVID-19 or epidemiology, so certainly seek subject matter experts and more information. But there's certainly pros and cons to staying open, staying closed, and opening the schools, not opening the schools, opening business, not opening business, starting a business. I mean, I've heard all kinds of stories about businesses closing down. In my town, we actually just had a famous breakfast spot closed down, which was kind of sad, but the business just isn't there during the COVID crisis. I would say that I am on Team Open. I think that we look at people like Joe Biden, you look at all these people, it's not so much about having the right position. Like, we need to open up. We need to have our schools open. That much is clear. But it's a matter of timing, it's a matter of safety, it's a matter of it's not that isn't like a controversial idea, open the schools. I know that it seems that way because in politics everything gets absolute this, absolute that. People start thinking in absolutes, and I say that's a fool's errand. But talking in absolutes is a different story because we're trying to actually have content. But people have it's not, these aren't controversial positions. It's just a matter of kind of, in politics especially, who gets to it first and who does it better, who has a better approach or application for what we're trying to accomplish. So we need to be adaptive, right? We need to make this is a very prescient, I guess, resolution, because normally we would have thought, oh, it's just another year. We'll have a crazy election season. We'll have all this stuff going on, Trump, Biden, all this stuff. At the time, we didn't know it was Biden. But now we've seen that this year has brought us so many questions and so few answers. The trust in the experts has gone down. So much has happened that it's hard to navigate, and I find that we do lean on crutches. We do lean on existing beliefs. We lean on confirmation bias. We lean on what's comfortable, both physically and mentally. Some would say cognitively, however it may be, psychologically. We all have found a way to cope, really, with the COVID crisis in different ways. My lifestyle hasn't changed too much personally. I've had work from home, which is fine. Seeing my friends less, seeing people less. But I've used that as a motivator to get me out and going out to the store as much as possible, going out to eat. I mean, we find ways to socialize, and of course things like Twitter and the internet at large. But anyway, we want to stay adaptive. We want to look for solutions, look for options. Don't become despondent. We have a tendency to become a little despondent. I've seen so much depression and anxiety on social media and in the real world, talking to family members and friends. I can't name any names, but people have exhibited signs that they are quite worried and quite fearful of what's going on. And so I say, try to stay adaptive. It's easier said than done. But in this case, you have this idea where you can go to max resolution, adaptive resolution. You go to max resolution sometimes, when in other times when there's a lot happening on screen, it goes a little bit, it goes a little blurrier, a little more broad, and that's adaptive resolution. And it can actually, you could frame it to apply to a normal lifestyle as well, where if there's so many things going on, you might want to drill down in certain areas, have your resolution really high for this thing and not so much for that thing. Of course, your mileage may vary. Everybody has their own interests, their own expertise, their own specialties. And so none of what I say here is supposed to be definitive, absolute. This is my perspective. This is some of my reasoning, some of my humor, and so forth. So I like to keep that out in front. So far, I've remained adaptive. I hope you have too. But if you enjoy 720p at a rock solid 60 FPS, well, I don't blame you.